That's how I feel about this show, by the way. I feel bad that my reaction to my brother's death was jokes, and I feel bad that I then took those jokes on the road for 3 years, and now I'm filming them and will sell this to people. I feel bad. Again, not bad enough that I'm not going to do it. Here we are, but I felt bad. I went back to therapy after my brother died. Not right after he died. It was after I started doing comedy again and felt bad about it. Like, that's just to paint kind of a picture of what affects me as a person. And I told the therapist, I was like, I feel like I shouldn't be doing this, right? Like, I should not write a bunch of jokes about how my brother died and then go do them for people. And she's like, well, no, like, that's your job. You're a comedian, right? If you were a carpenter, for example, and your brother died and you went in your workshop to make like a bunch of chairs, for example, no one would think that's weird. I'm like, right, but if I carved my brother died into all the chairs, I don't know that they'd be particularly good sellers. You know, like, I think I'd have a lot left in inventory at the end of the season. Would be the problem with that example, Doc. Also, I kept going back to this therapist, and after a few sessions, she's like, you know, Glenn, I mean, depression, obviously, look at you, but also, you show symptoms of having attention deficit disorder. And I was like, well, funny you should mention that, because a few years ago, I was going to a show with a friend of mine who's another comedian, and we were driving, and he just got diagnosed with having adult ADD. And he's like, you know, Glenn, we're pretty similar. We have a lot in common, including like symptoms. So you should probably think about talking to somebody. I was like, you know what? You're right. And then I never did, because I have ADD and I forgot. So when this new therapist pointed out, I was like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, I agree. And she's like, I think you would be helped by Adderall or some other stimulant. I was like, you know what? I got to do something. So yeah, how does this work? Do you have samples? Do you cut me a prescription? She's like, well, I'm a therapist. I can't prescribe any drugs. And I was like, so what do you want me to do? And she's like, well, just make an appointment with your regular doctor. And when you go, just describe some of the symptoms that we talked about. But before you go, Google the phrase drug-seeking behavior. And then don't do any of that. and I'm like, well, okay, but I mean, the pretty obvious flaw in your plan here is you're literally sending me there to seek drugs, right? Like, you know that. You know that's what you're doing. And she's like, right, but if he thinks you're there to just get drugs, he won't give you any. I was like, well, one, don't assume my doctor's a man, and two, I'm an adult, right? Like, can you write a note? And she's like, it's not how it works. Like, fine. So I make an appointment. I go to my doctor. My therapist is right, he's a man, but that's not the point. And I went in, I was like, this is dumb. I'm not gonna put on a little play for the doctor. So I told him, like, look, my therapist thinks I have ADD. She wants me to try a stimulant. He's like, nope. And I was like, should have seen this. I was pretty clearly instructed that this is how this is gonna go. So I go back to my therapist, and she's like, how'd your quest for Adderall go? I was like, I don't know why he wouldn't give it to me. I really thought I did a great job lying about not wanting drugs, but he wouldn't give me any of those drugs that I told him I didn't want. And she's like, well, you could try making an appointment with a psychiatrist, right? If they have more experience, they might feel more comfortable prescribing a stimulant of some kind. And I was like, okay, sure. And I used to see a psychiatrist. I wasn't currently when my brother died. And when I went to the psychiatrist originally, it was because I was depressed, and one of the symptoms that really made me think, like, well, I need to see somebody, was I would just cry for no real reason, like at movies, and not sad ones, specifically Spider-Man 2. I saw Spider-Man 2 in theaters, and when Mary Jane turns to him towards the end and says, go get him, Tiger, I cried uncontrollably for the rest of the movie. And in the credits, over that Chris Carrabba song, I was like, this probably isn't what I'm supposed to be doing right now. So I was like, I need to call somebody. So I went to this psychiatrist, and he put me on antidepressants. And then when I went back to him at my therapist's request, she told me, she's like, well, when you go, only talk about the ADD symptoms. Don't mention that your brother died. I'm like, why? And she's like, because then they're only going to want to treat the depression and not the ADD. And I was like, cool. So I go, I make the appointment, I meet with the psychiatrist. He's like, haven't seen you in a while. I was like, yeah, great catching up. He's like, how you been? I'm like, well, obviously not great, or we wouldn't be here. But he's like, so what? He looked at the chart and he's like, have you been crying? I'm like, well, a little bit. And he's like, why? I'm like, well, my brother died. Damn it! And then sure enough, he only wanted to give me antidepressants and not Adderall. But that same week, I ran into my friend at a show who got diagnosed years ago. And he's like, hey, how you been? I'm like, not super good, pretty sad. And I told him everything. I'm like, my therapist thinks I have ADD and she wants me to try Adderall. And he's like, well, you should be careful because I was on Adderall and I got addicted to it and I just got out of rehab. I wouldn't recommend it. I was like, oh, really? He's like, yeah, it's super addictive. I'm like, I had no idea. So then when I went back to my therapist, she's like, how's the quest going? I was like, still no luck. I don't know why. I'm doing everything you said exactly as you said it. I'm not winging it in any way, but no, doctor, it's hard out there. And I told her that I ran into my friend, and I'm like, he just got out of rehab. I didn't realize how addictive Adderall was. And she's like, oh, he just got out of rehab? I'm like, yeah. And she's like, well, maybe he has some extra. I'm like, I don't think that's how it works. Like, I've never been to rehab, but I don't think you show up and they're like, well, let me take most of your drugs, but like keep a few in case like a friend down the road needs a bump. And I was like, yeah, now I'm worried about taking it. I didn't realize it was so addictive. And she's like, yeah, I mean, it's basically meth. I was like, oh, meth. I live in rural New Jersey. I can get meth. If you said get meth, I've been done weeks ago. What are you talking about?